Hello and welcome back to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast. I'm Dr. Nerida, PhD equine nutritionist, owner of multiple good doers and someone who shares in the frustration of how hard it is to get one of these creatures to lose weight. So today we are talking about a topic that sounds simple but can be ridiculously difficult in real life: feeding horses for weight loss. Because for a lot of these very special air ferns who seem to be able to gain weight by just looking at grass, weight loss is not as simple as just feed less. In fact, when weight loss diets are done poorly, we can end up with hungry, stressed horses, frustrated owners, increased risk of gastric ulcers, altered behaviour, and diets that are missing essential nutrients that will eventually negatively impact the horse's health and well-being. And that is not good for the horse, and it makes it near impossible for you as their owner to stick to a weight loss plan. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through a better way to approach weight loss. We'll talk about removing high-energy ingredients, managing access to pasture and high-quality forage, using lower-calorie forages like mature grass, hay and straw, balancing the diet properly, and why exercise and movement can make such a big difference. Because the goal is not just to get weight off. The goal is to help horses lose weight safely while keeping them chewing, comfortable, nutritionally supported, and as happy as possible through the process. And feeding this way also gives you a method of feeding that helps you maintain them at a healthy weight into the future. So if you are ready and feeling game, let's get into it. I thought I'd start this one out by sharing with you just how much I feel your pain if you have got a good doer that is really, really hard to keep weight off. So if you've listened to the podcast at all, you will likely have heard me talk about Poet, who is my gorgeous gelding. He has been with me his entire life. So his mum was Coco, my beautiful horse that I had from when I was an 8-year-old child. And so he's basically an heirloom. And there was a stage in his life, it was when my kids were very young. So Bo, my son, was a baby, which is 13 years ago. And I didn't have a whole lot of time for horses at that point in my life. And he was very overweight. So he's a quarter horse. But I had in my mind that, his mum had never had laminitis, and I'd convinced myself that, he's fat, but he's happy and he'll be fine and I don't need to worry about him. His mum, Coco, had not ever had laminitis, but looking back now, I realised too, she was always in pretty hard work. Like, I rode a lot as a kid, so she was nearly always fit and pretty lean. Anyway, disaster struck. Poet did end up getting laminitis, and in the middle of summer was when I was really least expecting it. But it was really a good slap on the back of the hand, really, to me. And I did berate myself quite a lot for that little episode in his life, going, for goodness sakes, Nerida, you're a nutritionist. Like, you know what can happen when horses get overweight. So ever since then, he has been managed far more closely with regard to his body condition and his cresty neck. And he hasn't had laminitis since, which is amazing. And he's been such a good teacher for me in learning about creating, I guess, diets that will help these good doers to maintain a healthy body condition and also get weight off them when I need to get some weight off them. Because invariably, air ferns do put on weight really, really easily, and it doesn't matter how well you manage them. If you get a change in season, and just coming into spring, they have hormonal changes that will then drive weight loss, because you have to remember that these creatures are ancient creatures. They've been evolving for 55 million years, and they naturally go through weight gain and weight loss cycles. So, over hard winters, they would lose weight, and then coming into spring and summer, their body knew that they needed to put on quite a lot of condition so that they would have enough condition in reserve to lose weight in the following winter. Now, of course, being domesticated and living with us, what tends to happen is they'll put on weight in the spring and the summer, and then we look after them so well that they tend not to lose so much weight over the winter, so their weight can just go up and up and up. They get fatter and fatter as the seasons pass, because then they're no longer really truly going through these seasonal fluctuations in weight loss. So I have Poet as my teacher. I also have our beautiful Popcorn, who has also been with us. We bred her. She's also been with us since birth, so she'll be 15, I think, this year. Exceptionally good doer like her mother. I was far more aware of the risks of obesity for her, so she has been managed quite carefully throughout her lifetime, and I'll talk about her a little bit. And then I have our gorgeous Domino and Dellinger, who are the paint horses we essentially rescued as yearlings in terrible condition. They weren't quite walking skeletons, but they were pretty close. And they are now good doers as well. So they're living on our weight control track with Poet and Popcorn. So we'll talk a little bit about them. So I definitely am well versed in managing horses for weight loss because, this is my profession, and all four of those horses at various points in time will put on more weight than they should. And then I have to again go through this process of getting some weight off them. So let's dive in. I'm going to talk through 5 steps for feeding for weight loss because, as I said in the intro, it's really not just about feeding less. There's a strategy to it. And I guess the overarching theme is that we always have to honour the ancient gastrointestinal tract. We have to make sure that in feeding for weight loss, we're not solving one problem while creating a host of other problems because of the way we're feeding for weight loss. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we're going through the 5 steps, is that we want them to lose weight, but we want them to maintain pristine health in all their other areas of health, so gut health, mental health, just general welfare as we feed them for weight loss. So the first step in feeding for weight loss is the easy one, and it is remove any high energy ingredients from their diet that don't have another purpose in the diet. So if you think about it as humans, when we want to lose some weight, we generally will remove the really high energy ingredients. So sadly, chocolate goes out on that list. But, anything that's really high in sugar, triple chocolate mud cake. I was born actually I can't stand cake. So I'm always very grateful that I have that. I don't know where it came from, but I just don't like cake. But if you're a cake lover, I see people on weight loss diets going, oh, I'd really love to eat that cake. And, things like that go out of our diets really, really quickly when we are wanting to lose weight. Same as fried food. So anything that's saturated in oil and very, very high in calorie content. They're all the things that need to go really early on in a human weight loss diet. And it's the same for our horses. So the high energy ingredients that would be removed completely, cereal grains are on that list for me. So any cereal grain or any feed containing cereal grain should be removed from any horse's diet that is needing to lose weight, because grains really are only ever fed as a source of energy. They do have some minor benefits in bringing in fiber diversity, but really they're a foreign part of a horse's diet. We do use them because they're a very good source of energy for performance horses or for lactating broodmares and horses that do have really high energy requirements. But for our good doers, they need to come out of the diet. So first step, if you've got any cereal grains, so things like wheat or wheat feed, mill run, mill mix, bran, pollard, any of those names that we use for the byproduct of flour milling from wheat, they all need to come out of the diet, same as corn, oats, rice, barley, any cereal grain or cereal grain byproduct can be removed. Now, there are other high energy ingredients that need to be drastically reduced in diets of horses trying to lose weight. So the first one is oils. So oils do have dual benefits. So we feed oils for energy, and we also feed oils as a source of the omega-3 and omega-6 essential fatty acids. So you can maintain a small amount of oil in weight loss diets. And in fact, it is sometimes a good idea to maintain a small amount of oil in weight loss diets for skin and coat health and for omega-3 and omega-6 intake, because they are essential nutrients. But, for a 500 kilogram or 1,100 pound horse, we're talking less than 60 mils of oil per day is plenty to provide those nutrients. So if you've got any more oil than that in a horse's diet that is needing to lose weight, you need to reduce that down as much as you can to still give the benefits of the omegas so that you're reducing the amount of calorie that oil is providing in the diet to help encourage this good doer to lose weight. The other high energy ingredients that you might consider maintaining a small amount of are the high energy fibers. And so these are things like sugar beet pulp and lupin hulls and well processed soybean hulls or copra meal. And the reason you might consider keeping a little bit of those ingredients in a weight loss diet is because they do provide fiber diversity. And fiber diversity is really important for microbiome diversity. And again, if you listen to the podcast at all, you'll hear me talking about this a lot. But horses evolved on very diverse diets. So they were roaming free and they could pick and choose from any number of grasses and herbs and forbs and shrubs and trees. They had a huge variety of fibers, and that fiber variety maintained microbiome diversity in their hindgut. And it meant that we had all of the microbes in their hindgut that they needed to do all of the various jobs that the hindgut microbiome does. So in our domestic horses, it is really important to try to maintain as much fiber diversity in their diet as you can so that you're maintaining that microbiome diversity. And one of the ways we can do that practically in domestic horses' diets is to feed some of these high energy fibers. So if you've got them in your horse's diet for the purpose of fiber diversity, they can stay there. You just need to make sure that the amount you are feeding is not so much that it is contributing to excess calorie intake and preventing your horse from losing weight. You can assess your horse's dietary energy intake using the My Happy Horse nutrition app. And in fact, the free version will assess energy intake for you. So if you do have a good doer and you are trying to control calorie intake or energy intake, it's a really good idea to put their diet into the app, and then you can see if you are using any of these high energy fibers, you can see how much you can get away with feeding to maintain fiber diversity without exceeding their calorie intake. Okay, so that's the first step to safe weight loss diets. Let's remove high energy ingredients. The second step is to reduce access to high quality forages. So this is where most of our good doers come undone in a domesticated horse situation, is that they have evolved on unimproved, pretty sparse in a lot of situations, pastures and grazing areas, and they had to travel over vast distances a lot of the time to find food, so that they were moving a lot and burning a lot of calories in finding a food source. And now we have them confined into reasonably small pastures with access to pastures that in a lot of cases were designed to put weight on ruminants. So they're totally inappropriate for most horses in domestic situations because they're so high in energy that they just drive massive weight gain. And we end up with all of these horses who are such good doers and, they're so thrifty anyway, they put on weight so easily anyway. And then if they have access to these really high calorie pastures that are designed to drive milk production in dairy cows or designed to, drive weight gain in sheep or cattle, they just put on weight so fast. So a really important part of weight loss diets for good doers is that we do reduce access to these high quality forages. High quality forage can be in the form of pasture, as I've just spoken about, or it can be in the form of really high quality hay as well. So if the base of your horse's diet is high quality forage, so remember that the base of every single horse's diet, I don't care what they're doing, if they're high level performance horses or brood mares or some pony club horse or a retired old horse, every single horse's diet needs to be based on forage. But if the forage you have your good doer's diet based on is high in calories, that is going to drive massive weight gain. And it's going to be near impossible to get weight off your horse if their forage is too high in energy for them. So the high quality forages, as I just mentioned, can include the high quality pastures, and it can also include high energy hays. So legume hays like alfalfa or lucerne are really high in calorie content. And also our high non-structural carbohydrate hays. So there is a whole episode on non-structural carbohydrate where I talk about this topic in detail on the Happy Horse Nutrition podcast. I'm not sure what the episode number is, but if you search for non-structural carbohydrate or NSC in the podcast, you'll find that, and you can listen to me talking about that subject in detail. But essentially, hays like your cereal hays, so oaten or wheaten or barley hays and ryegrass hay, all of those plants accumulate a lot of what we call the non-structural carbohydrates, so starch and water-soluble carbohydrates. And as soon as a hay has a high level of non-structural carbohydrate, it becomes very high in energy content. I remember years ago, I was looking through a lot of pasture analyses that we'd done in the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales in Australia, and I just had the thought, I wonder how closely linked the non-structural carbohydrate content of the pasture is to the estimated digestible energy content. Well, it was essentially a straight line relationship. So the higher the non-structural carbohydrate content, the higher the calorie content of those forages. So when we're trying to feed for weight loss, we need to avoid any hay or pasture that has got a high non-structural carbohydrate content. To make this situation even more difficult is even when we have got really low quality hay or really low quality pasture, if you give free access to almost any kind of forage, with the exception of straw and like particularly stemmy straw-like hay, if you give free access to good doers who are not in work, to even to really low quality forage. So in my personal situation during summer, because our summers are quite hot and can be quite dry, our pasture will often just completely brown off. There'll be no green in it, and there's lots of pasture, but it'll be tall and stemmy and low quality. If I give my good doers, so Poet, Popcorn, Domino and Dellinger, if I give them free access to that really poor quality pasture, they still put on weight. If you looked at that pasture for a horse for a normal doer in any kind of work, and you assessed a diet just on that low quality forage but without any supplementary feed, their energy intake would be way lower than it needed to be, and they would actually be losing weight. But for good doers who are not doing very much and have got free access to pasture like that, they'll put on weight. I needed to fact check that myself, obviously, this year. I've been racking my brains trying to think what we were doing. There was a really, really busy time earlier this year, and I had Popcorn locked up because she had actually had a pulse in both her front feet, telling me that the dried off summer pastures that we had obviously dried off. We were in drought conditions, but there was short pasture in the paddock that I had open for them and that they were strip grazing in, that must have sort of snap dried off when it was still quite high in sugar content. And I watched Popcorn like a hawk, so I picked up pretty quickly that she actually had a pulse in both her front feet, indicating to me that laminitis is imminent if I don't do something. So I had her in a separate area, and she was on safe hay and being managed for laminitis. But the other three, so Poet and the two little paint girls, were in that same pasture, and for whatever reason they'd broken through the fence, and I hadn't had time to go out and actually fix their strip grazing fence. And I just thought, oh, they'll be fine. There's not a lot in that paddock anyway, and I'll sort them out in 4 or 5 days whenever life had settled down a little bit. Well, they had put on so much weight in that time. I'm thinking, seriously, you three, this is ridiculous. There was nothing but mature grasses in there, completely brown, and yet they still put on weight. So this is what makes these horses so hard, is that even when the forage quality is really poor, they will still put on weight because they're such good doers, especially if they're not in any work and they're not actually burning up a whole lot of calorie, because their level of activity is really low. And also too, it was summer, so they weren't even burning up a lot of calories to maintain their body temperature. So all that to say, free access to almost any kind of pasture or hay is going to allow these horses to put on weight. And if it's free access to good quality pasture, so any kind of pasture that is still green, they will put on massive amounts of weight really quickly if you give them unrestricted access. So the second step in this weight loss journey is to reduce that access to high quality forages. And you can do that in a few different ways. So if your horse is on hay, then it's a matter of changing the hays that they have access to. So if you had been feeding, say, a higher quality oat and hay or a higher sugar oat and hay, you could change that hay to a very low quality oat and hay, or you can change it to a much lower quality grassy hay or mixed grassy hay, something that has got a lower non-structural carbohydrate level and is more mature, stemmier, lower in energy, so that you're swapping out essentially a lot of energy coming in from the oat and hay for a lot less energy coming in from the mature grassy hay. And with hays like alfalfa hay, we don't want to remove them completely from the diet. We just want to reduce the access to them. So I love to maintain forage diversity, as I've already covered a little bit in the podcast, but lucerne or alfalfa is an excellent way to maintain forage diversity and also nutrient diversity. So, lucerne is going to be bringing into diets protein and essential amino acids that your horse may not be getting from other low quality forage. So it's not a matter of completely removing those really high quality legume hays. It's more a case of just restricting the amount so that you can still get the benefits of the nutrients that they contain, but you're not allowing them to actually exceed your horse's nutrient intake. With my crew, they don't get a whole lot of supplementary lucerne over the summer period, but in winter, when, again, for various reasons, the pasture quality may not be good or it may be really wet and cold, I do maintain lucerne in the diet, so they get it every day as a small amount of chaff. And then if it is wet and cold and miserable, they will get a low-quality grassy hay to munch on, but I will also give them some lucerne hay to maintain their calorie intake, give them something to chew on, make sure that they stay warm, and also to bring in that high quality protein and the amino acids that lucerne contains. So that's how I manage it with my guys. They don't get the lucerne hay every day, but they would get it maybe twice a week in winter when it is cold, and particularly when it's cold and wet. So what you want to avoid at this step is to not restrict access to high quality pasture by giving them some allocated time to graze freely and then keeping them off pasture but without access to other forage. So you have to avoid that at all costs, because you'll end up with a hungry horse that what they'll end up doing is when you give them that unrestricted access to pasture, they will go out and absolutely smash the pasture. So there was a research done in the UK that showed that ponies that were given something like 3 hours of access to pasture were able to consume a ridiculous percentage of their body weight in that period of time. So they just turn themselves into little vacuum cleaners that will just hoover up the pasture and consume a massive amount of calorie in that short space of time that they have got to graze. And then the other problem that happens is that when you give them this boom or bust style of feeding, they'll go out and consume a massive amount of calories when they've got access to the pasture. But then when they're not grazing, you're going to have a host of mental and physical health issues, because they're designed to chew, they're wired to chew for vast amounts of a 24-hour period. So they'll eat for something like 16 to 18 hours a day when left to their own devices, which obviously if you gave them 16 to 18 hours of good quality pasture access, they'd be the size of a small house within a matter of days. But what you want to do is if you're going to feed them like that, give them some access to pasture and preferably use strip grazing or a grazing muzzle or some way of actually stopping them from consuming those massive amounts of pasture in the short period of time they have got to graze. And then when they're not on the pasture, make sure that they have free access to a low quality forage. So low quality grassy hay and preferably a blend of low quality grassy hays. So don't just give them access to, say, really stemmy Timothy hay or a poor quality Rhodes grass hay. Try to maintain the the forage diversity still in these horses' diets and give them multiple different types of grassy hay. But when they're off the pasture, it's really, really important to make sure that they have still got access to forage to chew, which gives us a segue into step number 3 of feeding for weight loss, and that is to feed lower quality forages, including straw. So this is where, and I sort of jumped the gun a little bit, sorry, and I hope that wasn't confusing, that last bit that I just spoke about. But here is where the challenge of feeding a good doer really lies. It is that we have an air fern that gets fat on very little feed and forage, and yet they have a gastrointestinal tract that has been designed over millions of years for the constant intake of forage. And if we take away that constant intake of forage, we start to cause problems like gastric ulceration and psychological stress and leaky gut and all sorts of behavioural issues. And it just generally affects the horse's sense of well-being and their welfare. So anytime you've got horses standing around without access to forage, that is a welfare issue for them. They are not happy horses. Their stomachs are at really high risk of gastric ulceration. They're not designed to not have something to chew on. So the problem is, well, how do we feed a good doer and give it constant access to forage so that it's always got something to chew on without making it overweight? And in fact, in the context of this conversation, whilst also encouraging weight loss. And this is where these really low quality forages are your friend. And when talking about low quality forages, I also include straw in that category. So the low quality forages are forages that are really stemmy and stalky and will be low in non-structural carbohydrate preferably, and just generally low in energy or calorie content. And by providing unlimited access to those forages, you are satisfying your horse's desire to constantly chew. You are keeping the stomach full of fibre and also saliva, so you're going to be preventing the acid splash that will occur in the stomach when their stomach's empty and don't have enough fibre in there, by keeping them full of fibre, and also by letting them chew as much as they want over a 24-hour period. That chewing creates the saliva production, which then goes into the stomach and buffers the acid that's in the stomach and makes sure that the pH of the fluid in the stomach stays a little bit higher. It's not as acidic, not as burny as it would be otherwise if your horse wasn't able to constantly chew, which means the risk of gastric ulceration drops a lot. So, and I'm talking about squamous gastric ulcers, so the gastric ulcers in the top part of the stomach that occur when the stomach empties and the fluid becomes very acidic, and then it splashes or squeezes up onto the top part of your horse's stomach and literally just burns holes through the top of the stomach. Now, there's also a lot more information these days about the glandular ulceration and how glandular ulcers, which are the ulcers in the bottom part of the stomach, are related to stress. So to me, it makes a lot of sense that if we are also reducing a horse's level of stress by making sure that they've got forage to chew on and they're not in this state of food deprivation and psychological stress, then potentially and hopefully we are also reducing the risk of the glandular ulcers that will happen in the bottom part of the stomach. So remember that with weight loss diets, this is why we can't just feed less. So if it was a just feed less, so, with humans, with weight loss diets in humans, often they are an eat less situation, or at least, try to reduce your portion sizes, stop snacking between meals. So we actually create these longer periods of time in human weight loss diets where there's not food consumption happening. If we do the same thing to horses by feeding less and extending the periods of time that they don't have access to feed, we are just increasing the risk of gastric ulceration and creating welfare issues for our horses. So we simply cannot just feed less with horses. And this is where, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but it's such an important point. This is where bringing in these low quality forages, including straw, is so important for maintaining your horse's gastric health overall gut health and also to maintain a appropriate state of welfare for horses on weight loss diets. Straw in weight loss diets is such a valuable tool. So straw is essentially like feeding them cardboard. It's got very, very little energy value. It's also got very little protein. So it doesn't contribute to weight gain, and it allows them to do this thing where they've got lots of access to forage and they can chew and it keeps them happy, but it's filling them up without giving them very much energy. And in doing that, it is allowing you to actually pull weight off these horses without feeding them less. Do just keep in mind that you should limit the amount of straw in your weight loss diets to no more than 50%. And we'll talk about the importance of making sure that diets are properly balanced, especially when you're using these low-quality forages, in a moment. Hey, quick pause. You know what costs horse owners the most? It's not buying the wrong supplement. It's spending years second-guessing yourself, Googling at midnight and wondering if you're getting it wrong. That's the thing I built My Happy Horse to fix. It helps you create clear, personalised nutrition plans for your horse based on actual science, so you can stop doubting and start trusting yourself again. Find it at myhappy.horse or on the App Store. Okay, back to it. So just to give you a little bit of context with how I managed this with my horses, reducing the high energy forages and then providing them access to low quality forages, I will strip graze my horses. So my good doers all live in a big track. It's probably about be close to 1 kilometre long. I keep meaning to measure it and actually write the length down, but it would be close to 1 kilometre long, and they can travel that track. They can go out for pasture and then they have to come back for water. So they would walk the whole track, or the best part of it, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 times a day. I don't see them coming in and out at night. Obviously, I'm not sure how often they actually come up at night. I must put some sort of traffic tracking device on them one day and get a sense of how far they are actually traveling. But so they travel the track. I will give them access to new forage. And in fact, in episode 29 of the Happy Horse Nutrition podcast, I talk in detail about how I strip graze my horses and use strip grazing in combination with a track. So if you're curious to know more in detail about how I manage my guys, you can go and have a listen to that episode as well. But I'll give them access to new pasture. When the pasture is really, really lush and green, I'll give them access to new pasture first thing in the morning, because that is when the pasture is lowest in non-structural carbohydrate and therefore lowest in energy. And if it's really high quality pasture, they only get a little bit. And then back closer to their water source, they'll generally have access to either a really low quality grassy hay. I'll use, usually we'll use a low quality Rhodes grass hay, and they always have access to straw. So straw is always out for my horses, so that if they're standing around up near their water source and they're feeling like they need something to chew on, either for their mental health or because they can feel their stomach emptying and they need some more fibre and saliva in there, they've always got that option to go and eat the straw. It's not particularly palatable, so they won't just eat it because they feel like eating it and because it tastes good. They really will only go and eat it when they absolutely need and want something to chew on. But I see most of them there nibbling on the straw most days, so they will eat a little bit of it. They don't eat a lot of it though, depending on what else is on offers. But straw absolutely is your friend for these horses, and it's absolutely your friend partly because it is such a low quality forage and because they don't particularly like it, and therefore they will only eat it when they really need something to chew on. If you've got horses just on hay and you are using straw to reduce the overall energy intake of your horse's diet and to lower the energy content of your horse's forage portion of their diet, what I would suggest you do is actually make a hay salad out of the straw and your other grassy hays, and even lucerne hay can be mixed through there as well. So if you had, let's say you had a combination of some teff, of some low non-structural carbohydrate and mature low energy oat and hay, and some lucerne hay and some, I'm going to say Rhodes grass hay as well, and then straw. You might want to use straw as 50% of your horse's daily forage intake to bring the energy right down in that diet to try and encourage some weight loss. And then small parts of all of the other hays that I mentioned. Get all of your hays and mix them up into a big hay salad, because then in picking through and selecting out what they want to eat, they will eat some of the straw. And it's kind of like, I guess, eating. I try to teach my son, Bo, instead of just eating your vegetables by themselves at the end of the meal, mix them up with some of the other stuff that tastes really good that you like. And then, it's better eating them all together. So same kind of principle here. If you mix up and make a big hay salad out of all of those hays, it makes it more palatable for your weight loss horse to eat the straw, rather than putting the tastier hays to one side and then the straw to another, and getting frustrated with them because they won't eat the straw. And then you're feeling like, and I see and hear this happening, horse owners going, oh, my horse won't touch the straw. They end up feeding them more and more of the higher quality hays, and we don't actually achieve any weight loss in that situation because the energy intake from the forages is too high. So if you're in that situation where you're trying to use straw, your horse doesn't want to eat it, mix it together with all of the other forages that you have, all of the other hays that you have for them, and I think you will find that means that they will eat a lot more of the straw. The other thing to remember too in this situation where we are trying to restrict calorie intake is we can use these lower quality forages to make sure that we can still feed the overall bulk that a horse needs to maintain their gut health and their mental health, and the bulk that they need to eat in their diet. You should make sure that you feed at least 2% of a horse's body weight in forage every day. And if you find that even if you're employing straw to help your horse sort of slow down and have access to forage throughout a day, make sure or not make sure, but if your horse is ploughing through its daily hay intake and then leaving itself with long periods of time without hay, that's where you can start using some slow feeding hay nets or some, hay balls or other clever devices that there's so many of them around these days that will help to slow your horse's forage intake down and extend the amount of time that they spend eating throughout a 24-hour period. So they are super handy in these weight loss situations. I know that when my horses are fully on hay and they don't have pasture that they can go and pick around and eat throughout the course of the 24-hour period, I will always put at least a portion of their hay into hay pillows. So my preference is to use the hay pillows that just go on the ground, and they end up throwing them around, kicking them around, chasing them around to eat out of them, but they keep them in that head down position, and they really do they'll take hay that a horse might eat in less than 2 hours. It'll extend that period of time out to 6 or 8 hours for them to eat out of those hay pillows. So keep that little trick up your sleeve if you need it. If your horse is a relatively slow eater, lucky you, and you don't need to put their forage into hay nets. And in fact, if your horse is a slow eater, I wouldn't put their forage into hay nets. Just put it somewhere where they can access it easily and let them nibble and pick at it over time. And if you are using hay nets and you find that it's slowing your horses down so much that they're actually eating less than 2% of their body weight in forage per day, then put at least a portion of their hay out of the hay net so that they've got some free access to their hay and they're not having to work really hard to get the hay out of the hay net. But normally my observation is for these exceptionally good doers, they will become very proficient at removing hay from small hole hay nets. And there's horses over the years that I've known that we've had their hay inside multiple different slow feeding devices. So, we might have it in a small hole hay net, and then that small hole hay net goes inside one of those bins that's got the lid on the top that goes down as they eat the hay out of the bin, that's got the small holes as well, just to slow them down. I think that horse was an Andalusian, so anyone who owns an Andalusian, you will be able to relate. But yeah, it's normal for these good doers. They often will eat their hay quite quickly, and we often do need to use some sort of slow feeding device. So we've covered so far, just to give you a mini recap, we've covered the first three steps. So removing high energy ingredients from the horse's diet. And then we have covered restricting or reducing access to high quality forages. And then we've just finished talking about feeding lower quality forages, including straw, so that we can maintain the bulk and the amount of chewing and the physical stimulation of eating throughout a 24-hour period for these horses that are on weight gain diets. I just want to do a quick little sidestep here to talk about selecting the right forage. So absolutely the gold standard in selecting the right forage is to buy hay based on a lab analysis. And this is the method that I would recommend if it is available to you. There's lots of hays, and it's such a fun thing to see the industry really embracing selling hay based on an analysis. So if you can buy hay that is confirmed as being less than 10% non-structural carbohydrate and has a low energy content, and by that I mean an energy content below 7 megajoules per kilogram or below 0.76 megacalories per pound, depending on what units you speak in, that is ideal for these guys. And then your straws will generally sit around 6 megajoules per kilogram, which is 0.65 megacalories per pound. So if you can find hays and straws sitting around there, that is ideal for these guys. If you can't buy hay based on an analysis, don't stress. There was really cool research that was done by Sami, Julien and co in France in 2019. And they actually asked 54 humans, so non-expert people, so non-expert meaning they were not forage experts, to assess a whole lot of different hays based on the physical smell, touch, and appearance into groups, like to group these hays according to what their perceived nutrient value was. And what the research showed was that using smell, touch, and sight, like the appearance of the hays, these participants could actually reasonably accurately group the hays into digestible energy groups. So, hays that were low in digestible energy up to hays that were high in digestible energy. And consistently, and you'll be familiar when I say these words, but consistently, the low quality, low calorie hay was described in this research as being yellow, dry, thick stemmed, rigid, prickly, and like straw. So when you look at hay, do have some confidence in your own senses to be able to tell that a hay is going to be low in energy versus, a much softer, greener, beautiful smelling hay that you go, well, that is probably going to be reasonably high in calorie content. So if you don't have access to an analysis, use your own senses and find hays that are, could best be described as yellow, dry, thick-stemmed, rigid, prickly, and like straw. So the next step, and this is, these are all important steps, but for the long-term health of any horse on a weight loss diet, this one is so important, and that is to feed a balanced diet. So the steps that we've gone through so far, removing high energy ingredients, removing or reducing access to high quality forage, and then feeding low quality forages, all of that has only been focused on calorie intake in the diet. We haven't paid any attention up to this point to any other nutrient. And if all we do is focus on controlling calorie intake for horses on weight loss diets, you will end up causing a whole bunch of other health issues, because all of these low quality forages that we've been talking about are extremely low in protein, which means they're going to also be low in the essential amino acids that a horse needs for lots of different reasons. And they have got variable and sometimes low mineral content, and they often are completely devoid of vitamins. So if you just fed a low quality hay in order to get weight off your horse, you probably will succeed in getting weight off that horse, but at the same time you are going to be causing vitamin E deficiency, which then might cause severe muscle loss. You will cause copper and zinc deficiency, which is absolutely going to affect their hoof quality and their joints and their immune function. You might cause a sodium deficiency, which can then reduce water intake and put horses at higher risk of impaction colic, particularly when they are on those really low quality, very fibrous forages. And then there's also the very high possibility that you are going to cause deficiencies in nutrients like iodine and chromium, and both of those nutrients are really important for correct metabolic function. So if you're trying to encourage weight loss and you don't correctly balance the diet, you could in fact be making a horse's metabolic function worse. So if you make them iodine deficient, for example, they won't have enough iodine to make the thyroid hormones, and those thyroid hormones are in control of the speed of a horse's metabolic processes. So if they become iodine deficient, their metabolism slows down even more, and it will make it even harder to get weight off them. So we don't want to, in fixing one problem, we don't want to cause a host of other problems. And essentially your way around that is to make sure that you are feeding a balanced diet. This is where the My Happy Horse app really becomes your best friend, because you can put in all of your low quality forages, and the app has the nutrient breakdown for all of those low quality forages, and it knows, for example, that straw has 0 vitamin content. So it will bring in the fiber, and it'll contribute to the forage intake in the diet. And you'll be able to see the small energy contribution it makes to the diet. And you'll be also able to see that it actually doesn't contribute any vitamins whatsoever, and that those vitamins need to be bought in from another place. So when feeding horses for weight loss, I'd really, really encourage you to jump on the app. There is a 7-day free trial, so you're very welcome to just come in, balance your horse's diet, weight loss diet, make sure that you are meeting all of their requirements for protein, essential amino acids, vitamins and minerals, to make sure that as you are encouraging your horse to lose weight, you're also not creating hoof or joint or immune function or muscle loss issues. Plus a bunch of others that there's not enough time in a single podcast to mention all of the problems that will happen when your horse becomes deficient. So ingredients that you will need to consider for weight loss diets. So the first one is a no-brainer and a non-negotiable. So they must have free choice access to salt. Every horse needs free choice access to salt, and particularly in these weight loss diets where we're really restricting them down to pretty poor quality forages, make sure that they have got enough salt so that they can meet their sodium intake, they maintain their water intake, and reduce the risk of colic, and maintain all of the functions that salt or sodium is required for in their body. The next one to consider, as far as feeding a balanced diet, I've mentioned it a few times already, is to try and include multiple types of hays. The more forage diversity we can create in the diet, the more fiber diversity, and then that fiber diversity creates a more diverse hindgut microbiome. And that is essential for your horse's health and welfare for a million reasons that we don't have time to go into today. But if you go back to episode 9 of the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast, we start there with an episode with the amazing Dr. Belinda talking about the hindgut microbiome and their impact on everything in your horse's life. And then episodes 10 and 11 then talk about feeding for hindgut health. So if you haven't listened to those ones already, highly recommend you go back and have a listen to those if you are going down the path of feeding a weight loss diet. The next one to consider would be small amounts of lucerne or alfalfa, because that brings in some high quality protein, it brings in calcium, adds more fiber diversity. And also, contrary to popular belief, lucerne is a low non-structural carbohydrate forage. So if you've got a good doer who's also prone to laminitis, which many of them are, it is a safe forage to feed, and just feed it in small amounts. So as we already discussed, it's a high energy feed. So if you feed too much of it, you will undo all of your hard work in trying to create a weight loss diet. But as part of a balanced diet for overweight horses, it is a brilliant addition. you want to then start thinking about, well, how are you going to bring in the vitamins and minerals that your horse needs? So you can use grain-free, low non-structural carbohydrate, low dose balancer pellets, or you can use a vitamin and mineral supplement that is just fed in very small amounts to horses to bring in, things like copper, zinc, selenium, iodine, and then the vitamins that are really, well, devoid in straw and at very, very low levels in your low quality hays that you'll be feeding as well. So it's critically important that you get those nutrients into your horse's diet, either via a balancer pellet or a vitamin and mineral supplement, so that you're not causing deficiency problems as the weight loss journey continues for this horse. And in fact, we're talking about weight loss diets, but it also really applies to weight maintenance diets. So once you get weight off these horses, you then need to feed them in a way that's actually going to maintain that healthy body condition. Because if you just let them go back to eating the way they were before, they will put on more weight than you can possibly imagine within a couple of weeks. I kid you not, my horses can put on a whole condition score of body condition coming out of a winter into a spring, and it amazes me every year. And this is what I do for a living and have done for the last 25 years. I say, how can you put on weight so fast? It's crazy. So we have to restrict feed them, essentially, restrict calorie feed them for their lifetime, unfortunately. And so making sure that they're getting a balanced diet and using these balancer pellets or vitamin and mineral supplements is important throughout their lifetime, so that they're always on a balanced diet and you're not causing long-term deficiency symptoms that will eventually show up in their health if they stay deficient in some of these minerals and vitamins over a long period of time. Another ingredient that I love in weight loss diets is a small amount of soybean, because it brings in that really high quality protein and the essential amino acids. There is a whole podcast on protein quality, so if you're interested in following that one up and learning more about that, I'd encourage you to go back and have a listen to that one. I can't think of the number off the top of my head, but if you just search in your podcast app protein quality inside the Happy Horse Nutrition podcast, you'll find it. I also love lupins, being very Australian here, but lupins are beautiful in these diets in very small quantities because they bring in some fiber diversity, they bring in some nice protein, and they bring in some just general ingredient diversity, so that you're getting nutrient diversity in the diet still. And then, as I spoke about really early on in this podcast, small amounts of those fibers, so the copper meals and the sugar beet pulp. If you've got a horse that is very prone to laminitis, make sure with your sugar beet pulp that you are soaking and rinsing and soaking and rinsing and soaking and rinsing, so that you're getting more of the residual sugar that tends to be floating around in sugar beet pulp out. Hemp hulls and hearts, other legume hulls like lupin hulls, I absolutely love if you've got access to them. Otherwise, well-processed soybean hulls. All of these ingredients are bringing in fiber diversity. So do be aware, as I've already mentioned, that they are high energy ingredients. So you will need to be careful that you're not overfeeding them. Again, use the My Happy Horse Nutrition app to make sure that you're not exceeding calorie requirement when you're adding some of these high energy fibers in. But if you can get small components of some of those ingredients in, it just means that you're maintaining the diversity of the microbiome in your horse's hindgut. And then that microbiome diversity is ensuring that overall your good doer maintains good health and also good mental health and good behavior. Because remember, that microbiome is talking to that horse's brain via the gut-brain axis and controlling a lot of their behavior. So it's super important to make sure that as we feed for weight loss, that we're also maintaining hindgut health. And then the last ingredient you might want to consider is just small amounts of flaxseed oil and canola oil. I love it blended 50-50 for horses on these weight loss diets, because then we're bringing in good amounts of omega-3, and we're also still bringing in some omega-6 fatty acid, which is an essential nutrient in horses' diets, and we need to maintain their intake, especially if you've got them on a pretty high straw diet with other low-quality forages and no access to any green pasture, which will be the case for a lot of these horses. So do just be conscious of making sure that we're still meeting those omega-3 and omega-6 requirements. So it really is, accurate diet balancing is really essential for these horses. And I often won't use my happy horse to check and adjust diets as often as I probably should. But I was thinking about it the other day. We've just gone from drought conditions into a really, really lush pasture situation. And I had a lay, my daughter's off the track thoroughbred, on quite a lot of vitamin E in her diet because our pastures were completely brown. There was zero green grass in any of our pasture. And so the vitamin E content just disappears out of the pasture when that happens. And then it rained, and all of a sudden we've all got all of this green grass. And so I've adjusted her diet, like physically in real life, I've adjusted her diet accordingly. And I've taken out the supplemental vitamin E because she doesn't need it anymore because there's so much green grass available, and fresh green pasture, particularly when it's young, is really high in vitamin E. I haven't put that through the app because in my head, I know, and my brain becomes essentially like a human nutrition calculator. But for horses on weight loss diets, I will always put them through the app because I'm so worried that I will miss something in getting these diets balanced properly. And if I miss something over the long term, and particularly for my 4 horses who are always managed on these low energy weight maintenance diets, I'm always worried that I will miss something if I don't properly analyze their diet. So it is really important to get their diet balance right, and the My Happy Horse nutrition app can definitely help you doing that. So you can download it from the App Store, or if you want more information about it, you can go to myhappy.horse. And before we go to the fifth part of weight loss diets, I do just want to mention quickly that it's really, really important that you measure something as you're on the weight loss journey. So there's that old saying that you can't manage what you don't measure, and it is really true in this situation where if you don't know whether your horse is losing weight or not, it's really hard to then know whether you should be restricting calorie intake even more, or whether your horse is actually losing weight too quickly, and therefore wouldn't that be nice, everyone says, but you don't want them to lose too much weight either. And it is really important to assess and measure and also record their body condition and their body weight. Another really cool little tool you can use is the Cresty Neck Score. So this is from Fitzgerald et al. 2019. And the Cresty Neck Score is really predictive of insulin dysregulation. So it's more predictive of insulin dysregulation and then risk of laminitis than what body condition score is. So if you don't know what the Cresty Neck Score is, go and Google it. It's Fitzgerald et al. 2019, and you'll also see there's lots of different companies have created their own images of the Cresty Neck Score, so you can grab one of those and give your horse a score, write it down somewhere. In fact, we should add that to our app. You can definitely record body weight in the My Happy Horse app, and body condition score it will keep track of for you as well, and also photos. So we do have the ability to add condition score photos in the app, but make sure you're taking some photos from the same angles each month, because when you're seeing your horse every day, it's not necessarily evident that they are losing weight because you're seeing them every day. But if you've got photos you can look back on and go, oh yeah, look at them a month ago. One, it's good because you're tracking it. And two, it'll give you a sense of accomplishment as well, because there's nothing more disheartening than feeding a horse for weight loss and feeling like you're not getting anywhere. And with that, I'll move on, and we won't spend a lot of time on this one, but the fifth step to feeding for weight loss is don't rely on diet alone. So weight loss is so difficult to achieve in many exceptionally good doers. I know that because I live it every day. And I had a funny, not funny moment there with Popcorn. So Popcorn was Tamaya's competition horse for a few years. She's a little girl that we bred, and she's mostly Australian stock horse. And I laugh when I say her name because it's really not a very appropriate name for an overweight and insulin dysregulated equine. There's probably no food ingredient that would stimulate a ridiculously high insulin response than popcorn. But anyway, she stopped competing with Jamea in June last year, so 12 months ago. And on the 22nd of May 2025, she had her teeth done. And whenever Dr. Doug, our wonderful vet, does their teeth, he has weigh scales in the crush. So they get weighed. And it was funny, this year, 2026, Doug was here doing their teeth again. And I pulled up their weights from last year. I said, "Oh, Doug, look at us go." It was the 22nd of May 2025. And it was the 22nd of May that he was back in 2026, completely accidentally. But it meant that I had a weight exactly 12 months after the weight that was taken last year. Now, in 2025, she was fit and ready to go to an interschools where she was going to be eventing. So she was at, ideal weight, and she was being ridden regularly. 2026, she'd essentially spent 12 months doing very, very little. And she was 35 kilos heavier than she was at this time last year, despite me having her on a track and controlling her diet really, really carefully. When I saw her weight, and we'd had other horses come through on those weigh scales, and they were weighing around where I thought they should have been. And then popcorn came on. I said to Doug, are you sure your scales are working properly? Because she was 35 kilos heavier than she should have been. But it just goes to show that even when you're using a very controlled diet to manage their weight, it is so hard without exercise to keep weight off these horses. I was having a bit of a giggle to myself. Bo and Tamara and I had watched a movie on Friday night called Max, which was about a Belgian Malinois. He was a military dog. It was a beautiful story if anyone wants a nice dog story to watch with your kids. But I lost my beautiful Chewy in December last year. I mean, she was old. She had cancer, and we had to put her down, which is always so heartbreaking with dogs that have been in your life for so long. And I'm gonna make myself cry here. And I haven't got another puppy yet because I haven't had time, and we've got both my kids have dogs, so there's been doggies around to love. But I was watching that movie, I thought, oh, a Malinois would be cool. And I love them. They're a lot of dog. And I found these German Shepherd Malinois puppies. I'm like, oh, they would be so cool. And then I went, hey, ChatGPT, what would a German Shepherd Malinois puppy be like? And ChatGPT comes back and says, well, they're a lot of dog, and these are not dogs that you can just exercise a lot and have them happy. They need a job. And if you do not give them a job, they just become essentially a problem. They'll make a job out of chasing cars or guarding their property excessively. And my first thought was, I definitely don't need that in my life. And my second thought was, well, hang on a minute. I wonder if I could make its job actually making the track horses move all the time. Have it out there. Like, right, you lot, 4 fatties, move along. You've been standing here eating for long enough. But anyway, I dismissed that idea pretty quickly because it was not ever going to work unless you were very, very good at training dogs to make sure that horses can graze for long periods of time. But all that to say, exercise is super important. And if you can get horses to exercise, either by having them in work, or I do use my track as effectively as I can. And in fact, if you want to listen to a really cool podcast on this subject, is episode 44, Species Appropriate Horsekeeping and Why Track Systems Work, with the beautiful Dr. Catherine. It's a really good conversation. So tracks do help, and I have no doubt that if I didn't have popcorn in a track, we would have more than 35 kilograms of weight on her over that 12-month period of her not being ridden. So do try and make them move as much as you can. And then the other annual event that you should take advantage of for weight loss is winter. So cold weather increases a horse's calorie expenditure and speeds up weight loss. They absolutely lose weight a lot faster in winter than they will in summer. So leave your good doers unrugged. Make their bodies work to maintain their body temperature. Make their bodies burn calories and encourage weight loss. And then when it comes to spring, get onto their pasture intake, control them really, really carefully so that you don't undo all of the hard work you've done over winter and getting weight off them by allowing them to then put a whole heap of weight back on really quickly. I know that it's easier said than done. I feel you. I live it every single year as we go through winter. My horses are all in beautiful body condition at the moment. And in fact, Poet, I've started just giving him a little bit of extra lucerne hay because, I'm getting to the point where when he's turning, I can see his ribs, and he's 23 years old, so I don't want him to lose too much weight. And we're still only in June, which is, still the start of our winter here in the Southern Hemisphere. But it helps so much to get them to lose weight in winter. So in wrapping all of that up, I do just want to reiterate, weight loss diets are not easy. They're not easy from an owner's perspective. So in the podcast episode last week, we talked about weight gain diets. They're also not easy. They can be frustrating. They can be expensive. But at least with a weight gain diet, you're getting that daily satisfaction of feeding a horse. I find that's so satisfying, so heartwarming, being able to go, oh, here's your food for weight gain. And, yes, please put on weight. And that part can be a little bit nerve wracking. But with weight loss diets, I think there's much more pulling at the heartstrings because you feel like you're restricting these horses. You feel like you're not able to feed them lots. But hopefully with what we've talked about in this podcast episode, it helps you to realize that you actually must feed them a lot. So you must still give them free choice access to forage. You must never, ever lock them up without food in trying to get them to pull weight off. And in fact, in saying that, it stirs a now very distant memory. I think I was 17 and working on a thoroughbred stud. This was back in the mid-90s, and we used to use horses to move all the thoroughbred horses around. So if we needed to move, a group of mares and foals from one pasture to another or whatever, we would actually ride our riding horses and move the brood mares and their foals. And one of the guys that worked on that farm, I remember when I was there, and I just, as a 17-year-old, I knew that it was wrong, but I wouldn't have been able to put it in the words that I can now. But this guy used to lock his horse up without food for 2 days. Oh, kills me now thinking of what was going on inside that horse's gut, and just, force that horse to lose weight really, really quickly over a 2-day period. I mean, that's an extreme example of what not to do. But even just having horses, for more than 4 hours at a time, absolute maximum of 6 hours at a time without something to chew on, that causes gut health problems, and it causes mental health issues. And for you as the horse owner, it's so heart-wrenching having a horse that's calling out to you because they're hungry or want something to eat. So weight loss diets done well will keep horses happy. They'll have them moving. They'll have them losing weight. They should give you a sense of confidence and satisfaction, and you should be able to know that your horse is happy enough. I'm sure they would be happier if you let them out to have, free access to all the beautiful pasture that they may have right next door like my horses do. But, they're content. If I walk out the door and I have one of my horses calling out to me, and the beautiful Joanna talks about this in our podcast episode about depression, if my horses are calling out to me, I know that they need something, and I need to figure out, why are you not content? I walked out there this morning, 2 of them are lying flat out on the ground. The others are all standing some in the sun, some in the shade, fast asleep after having come up for water from where they're able to graze at the moment. So they should be content even when they're on weight loss diets. And if they're not, then you need to go back and have a look and see, are they getting enough forage? And if you're having to restrict the amount that you feed them, because if you feed them more than that, they put on weight, the quality of your forage is too good. You need to find lower quality forage so that you can feed them more, keep them chewing, keep them full, keep them happy, but still encourage weight loss. So super, super quick fly through, just to recap, the 5 steps to safe weight loss diets were: 1, remove your high energy ingredients like cereal grain or large quantities of oil or the high energy fibers. The second is to reduce access to high quality forages. The third was to feed your lower quality forages, including straw, so that you can keep them full. The fourth was feed a balanced diet, so critically important. Make sure you grab yourself the My Happy Horse nutrition app so that you can put everything that you're feeding in and find any gaps in the diet and fill them with whatever ingredients you need, so that the diet is balanced and it will maintain their health long term. And then the fifth was don't rely on diet alone. So use exercise when you can, keep these horses moving as much as possible, and make the best possible use of winter to pull weight off your horse. I really hope that helps. That was a big topic, and like all of these subjects, we could talk about feeding for weight loss for days and days, but I hope that gives you some foundations for going and assessing any horse's diet that you may have that you're trying to pull weight off at the moment, and help you to make some positive changes and to actually get some weight off them. Thank you so much for being here, and I will catch you in the next episode. If you'd like to know more about the My Happy Horse nutrition app and how it can help you create personalised nutrition for your horse, grab the download link straight from the show notes, or head over to myhappy.horse. And while you're there, check out Dr. Nerida AI. That's me in AI format, ready to answer your horse nutrition questions even in the middle of the night. Thank you for being here, and I will catch you in the next episode.